So the first thing is that when you open up Maya, you see this perspective. You see this box that says perspective at the bottom. This is basically your scene view or your viewport. You're able to view your scene, and if I were like to put a cube over here, you can see over here that there's this cube. So basically, this is basically your main editing. It's kind of similar to Unity where you can move your game objects around and stuff. So kind of similar over here. You can do that over here. This is your viewport, and this is where you're able to view all your objects. The next window that there is the outliner, and the outliner is similar to the hierarchy in Unity. So there are a lot of things which are similar in Unity and in Maya. So the outliner has different, basically your objects. Like if I have a polygon over here, or if I have a sphere over here, basically that's basically all your objects and your primitives. And primitives are basically basic three-dimensional shapes. You can also manipulate the primitives to create more complicated shapes. The next part of the next window shown over here is these panels. So the panels at the top are just a collection of tools that you can use for modeling, animating, or in rigging. Rigging is basically adding joints and moving joints around to animate a complex object like a human or an animal. There are multiple joints, so that would be rigging. And over here, right above this panel, you can see that there are multiple options for modeling, for rigging, animation, and based on that, the top bar over here is where file edit and create is. That will change with different options, but we're going to just do modeling for now. We won't really have to do that much of animation as such in Maya unless we're doing more complicated animations, but in general, when we're going to be using Maya, we're mainly going to be using it for the 3D modeling. So you can also see over here that your polymodeling and sculpting. So the main ones we're going to be using are polymodeling. Polymodeling is basically, these are called polygons. Polygons are essentially, just think of them as normal shapes. We'll get into more detail the difference between NURBs and polygons. Just NURBs are mainly more for the vertexes are a bit different, and you can manipulate them, kind of create more rounder edges compared to the polygons, which are more straighter edges. Another thing is that we have these tools on the side, on the left-hand side, and basically these are like similar to Unity, where you have a select tool over here. You have a translation tool where you can move an object around, and then you have a rotate tool and a scaling tool. Just gonna reset this. Okay, yeah. So if I were to create a cube, you can create an object by just clicking at the top over here, and I can focus on the cube by pressing F, similar to Unity. And if I want to move my object around, I can move it over here. I can move it with these arrows and everything. And you can actually see, if I go to my channel box, which is on the right-hand side over here, I can see that as I change and as I move and translate the cube, or if I rotate it or whatever, you can see that it updates in the channel box. So Unity has a window called Inspector, this is also kind of like the same thing as an Inspector, except these are more modeling related tools. So I can even manipulate this. So if I can move this around and everything, I can put this anywhere. So let's see, 1 point, so I can move around, and I can also scale over here. I can scale in any axis. And also one other thing is that the coordinate system for Maya and Unity might vary. I think they updated it in the newest update of Maya, but basically the coordinate system, you should always keep in mind of one thing which is called local and global coordinate systems. What I mean is that your local and global coordinates, your local coordinate system on an object depends on the object. So for instance, if I have this cube over here and I rotate it sideways, we can see that this is a you can see that so if you see over here, you can see that the position of it is pointing towards this direction. So you can see these three arrows over here, and this is on a global scale because these three arrows always point in the direction of the global scale, which is if I were to rotate this object again and make it upright, the arrows don't move with it. Yeah, the arrows still point in the same direction always, even though if I rotate it. But in the local system, the arrows will rotate as you rotate and manipulate the cube. Another tool over here is the timeline, which is for animation, but we aren't going to be using it unless we do any complicated animation in Maya. Generally, we can do basic animation in Unity, such as moving an object or rotating it or scaling it or changing the color, but we will generally not use the timeline or animation in Maya. Yeah, so there are also other tools over here, and then there is also the ability to do scripting, but just ignore that over here at the bottom. Next, you also have a modeling toolkit, which we will be using later on. So the modeling toolkit is basically tools that you can use to perform actions on a cube, or any type of polygon. So there's symmetry and other things which, like for instance, if I were to select the face over here, if I were to have symmetry across the x-axis, you can see that both sides are being selected. If I select only this one side, both sides are being selected. So we'll be talking a bit more about these tools later. So then, F, yeah. So if you always if you like lose track of where your cube is, you can just press F, and then it'll automatically go back to it. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how you can manipulate shapes in general, or manipulate polygons in general. So if I have a sphere over here, I can right hold click on the sphere, and then I can select any one of these. So I can select the edges, vertex, face, and the object mode. So this is object mode right now. I can move individual objects. But if I want to specifically select a face, I would hold right click on it and then select face. I'm just going to turn off symmetry. So basically I can select a face over here or over here, and then I can manipulate that individually. So I can also rotate it and scale it. And also if you put in wireframe mode, you can also see. So you can actually change the mode over here at the top panel to wireframe or solid. And if you want to get out of this, you can just hold right click and select object mode. So now you're back to manipulating the object as a whole. To delete an object, you just press the backspace, and I'm going to show you another thing. So if you hold right click and then you select vertex, you can manipulate the individual vertex. So you can see I'm able to move it in different directions. If I press shift and left click, I can select multiple vertices at the same time. And then if I want to select the vertex face, so vertex face is mainly for just checking that there are no hidden vertices. We won't have to use vertex face, but if you have a more complicated model, you would use vertex face to make sure that there are no hidden vertices. If you want to select an individual edge, you just hold right click and you move over to edge, and you can select and manipulate an individual edge over here, like this. Or you can also rotate it, or you can scale it. And then once you're done with manipulating the object, you have to hold right click and then go to object mode, and then you can select other objects too. So while you're in edit mode, you won't be able to select anything. So edit mode would basically mean when you select either the edge, vertex, or face, or anything like that, you won't be able to select another shape. But once you're done with, so for instance, once I'm done with modeling this cube, I'll just go back to object mode. Also, there's an attribute editor, which also you have the ability to do translation, rotation, scale, and also and other things such as rotation of axis. But the main things we're going to be focusing on are the translation, rotation, and scale. And those tools you can also view on the side. There are also keyboard shortcuts. W is for the translate tool, E is for the rotation tool, and R is for scaling. T is for another type of tool, but we'll go over that later. Another thing that you can view is that you can also view this thing called polycube. So every time you create a polygon, you have a window, a tab over here that says polycylinder, polycube, or polysphere, and over here you're able to actually adjust certain attributes of the shape, but you can only do it with only like the first object that you create. If you create a duplicate of this object, you won't have the ability to do that again. So over here you can adjust the subdivisions. So you can see I'm able to make it like a triangular prism, and then I can make it a cylinder by increasing the subdivisions. So in general, around 32 to 24 subdivisions of a cylinder make it look round. It's actually not round. These are hard edges over here, but if there are enough, about 32, it looks kind of round. So if you increase the subdivisions or try and make it too round or too complicated, then it could be pretty bad in Unity, because we have to also keep in mind to make sure our models aren't too complicated so that it's too slow in Unity. You can also adjust the subdivision height and also the cap. So the cap is basically over here. Let me just change the renderer. Yeah. You can kind of view that you can change the amount of cap over here. And you can also change the radius or the height, but we'll generally be using the scale tool. The scale tool can do that also. Yeah. So and then once you're done with your project, you can just press Control S, and you can save it. Generally, you can create your own project. So I have a default project over here, so I can save it. I'll save it in the scenes folder. Every time you create a Maya scene, this is kind of like Unity in a way, but it's a bit different, because every time you create a scene, you can choose which project you want to keep it. So I have a default project, and you can actually view on the left hand side all the scenes, assets, images. This is mainly used for when people are creating like animated movies. They would need to have like a folder for clips, sounds, scripts, but we'll only be using the scenes folder, and maybe at most the source images if we have a texture we want to put into Maya. So you would be able to save over here in the scenes folder.
Yeah, so just keep in mind whenever you're saving also, be careful, because sometimes I believe like Maya crashes sometimes. At least that's what happened for me, and sometimes my work wasn't saved properly. So there's some sort of setting where it like makes multiple saves like during like after a couple minutes or something like that. After it's changed.
Yeah, so I think you can also put that in the preferences. There's also, you can actually go into the preferences and add a lot of extra things, but only thing is that in the preferences there are a few things which you shouldn't change. Especially keyboard shortcuts for the most part, you shouldn't change, because going from computer to computer it might vary. So so you actually can, if you go to preferences, which is over here, Windows, settings, preferences, you can actually see where you can have how many files you have, and then autosave. If you want to enable autosave, you can enable that like every 10 minutes. You can also add extra things, and these are mainly in the preferences, so we won't have to do much in the preferences for the most part. The next part is I'm just going to go over materials. So if you want to, for instance, if you want to put a color on this cube we have over here, you just hold right click, and then you'll be able to select. If you go all the way down to assign new material, and then you release the right click, and then you can choose any of these. So ignore most of these materials for the most part, except the Lambert, the default color is Lambert, which is a type of shader that is not too reflective, but kind of like a default color. You can choose Fong or Fongi. Fongi is kind of the same as Fong, but we'll mainly be using Lambert or Fong. But it really doesn't matter because when we're in Unity, we'll be reassigning the textures anyways and the materials. So for now, let's just select Lambert, and then we can change the color over here. Yeah, so I can also change it. If you click on this, and if you double click, you can get this window, and then you can change the color. So if you double click on the color, over here you can see that there's a pop-up window, and unfortunately the screen recorder will not show the pop-up window. But if you double click on the color, the box next to the color, it will show up a pop-up window with a color wheel, and you can change the color from there. So I can also change the transparency. So as you can see, as I'm moving the slider, you can see the cube is becoming less sharp, and I can also change the ambient color, which is basically the surrounding color, but we don't need to worry about that. And the incandescence is kind of like the brightness, but we don't need to worry about that right now. So I can also choose other types of material, such as the blend material, which is a little more reflective, or the Fong material, which is usually what's used for kind of like plastic or glass types of reflective surfaces. But most of these materials we're going to be doing in Unity, so we don't need to worry about too much specifying which one we want. The diffuse we can actually just change all the properties directly from the attribute editor. Yeah, so I just assigned this cube to the red color we had previously by holding right click and then selecting assign existing material and then selecting the previous color that we had, which was this red color. So unfortunately the screen recorder does not show some of the selections I'm making by holding right click. Okay, so I just duplicated by pressing Control D. I duplicated the cube, and what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to change the color of the cube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold right click and select existing material, and I'm going to select the red colored one. And actually I can change the polycube over here. And one thing is that in a duplicated object, the polycube tab does not appear, and it only appears in the first instance of an object. And the duplicated object is the blue object, and the non-duplicated object, the original one, is the red object. One thing to note is that you should not change the subdivisions much after you've already manipulated the faces or vertexes, because you can see as I'm moving the subdivisions now, after I've done that, it's kind of causing some things that we haven't intended. Like after we pulled up that one face, it started causing other issues. So yeah, I just deleted that cube by pressing the backspace button. Alright, so I think we're going to continue the lecture next week, in next week's meeting. Okay, thank you for listening.